Good day and welcome to another video. So glad that you guys clicked in. You know, there's been a ton of videos that have been released regarding this debate. I guess it's the debate of the century, between Christian apologist Wes Huff and Billy Carson. And, Christians all around, all over YouTube are just celebrating this as this triumphal victory, that, the big bad dragon of Billy Carson has been defeated, and, he has been debunked. And like I said in a video was on another platform we had, I said, Billy Carson has already kind of been debunked years ago. People have already called him out, on things that he said that's inconsistent, things that it just clearly he's making up, that kind of stuff. He does say some things that are accurate historically, so it's not that everything he's saying is false, because if that was the case, he wouldn't have the large following that he has. But, it doesn't, if you line somebody up with someone who is actually trained in that area, when you're talking, if you're having a debate on theology, and you don't really have a strong background in theology, it's kind of a mismatch anyway. But it's funny to sit back and to see how Christians are really using this as some kind of like huge win or whatever. But as I've said previously, the debate itself, I didn't see anything at all in it that actually proved the evidence or provided the evidence that a man called Jesus Christ actually not only existed, but did all the things that the Bible claims he did, like healing the sick and raising the dead. I didn't see any of that at all. If anything, they were debating and quibbling over, which text is more accurate than the other text and that kind of stuff. But, Dead Sea Scrolls versus this and that or whatever. You could debate over those things, but Christianity at the end of the day is a faith, right? And what is faith? Belief. So the thing that apologists like to do oftentimes is where they don't have the answers, they will do an infill of faith, because that's what it is. It's a faith. It's a belief. We're just to simply believe that, Jesus raised people from the dead. Why? Because the Bible said so. But do we have actual proof that that took place? Yes or no? Jesus said, and I bring this up oftentimes, he says, greater works than these shall you do. He talks about how all you have to do is simply believe, and you'll do things that I did, but only greater. But then when we look at actual Christians and see if they're actually walking in that, well, we don't see that at all. Well, that's a red flag right there, because if Christians today are not exercising that or demonstrating that, then there's a huge chance that the claims about the healings and all this, the miracles that are documented in the Bible, well, perhaps those didn't happen, and then you can ask some other questions as well. So I saw this debate. Like I said, it really wasn't it's just me. I'm not trying to throw cold water on it, but I honestly don't see how this was. Now, if this was a debate between two apologists, okay. If it was a debate between an apologist and a philosopher or someone like that, okay. Now, but Billy Carson, I don't see how that's even an even match, So anyway, there's plenty of debates. If people really want to see, if Christians are really interested in a debate, then I will point them to this debate here that I'm about to show you. This is only an excerpt of it. It's about 10 minutes long. And we're going to sit back and watch it. And I promise you, I probably will interject maybe one time, because I really want you to hear it. And this is a debate that is taking place between Dinesh D'Souza. And he is he graduated from Dartmouth in arts. But he's also very has a lot of experience in the world of politics. He did a book, and I have it here. He actually wrote a book coming up here. It's called What's So Great About Christianity. And that book basically takes an apologetic look at Christianity, and it looks at different areas such as like the Big Bang Theory, Darwinism, all of these other things. And, he was also, besides the book, he's come out with other books as well. A lot of his stuff is really about, morality, things along those lines. But he was also a policy advisor for the Reagan administration. So he's not a dummy. This man is clearly not a dummy at all. And, when you're dealing with theology, that's just one of the things that he kind of sort of does, right? And he came out with a book about it. Well, on the other hand, you have this gentleman by the name of Alex O'Connor. Now, Alex O'Connor is a graduate from Oxford University, and he does have a background in theology. And this is something that he spends a great deal of time debating, talking about, among other things as well. So he has more of a solid background when it comes to theology. And let me just say this, one does not have to have a degree in theology to be able to have a discussion about theology. You understand what I'm saying? But if you're going to have a discussion about it, make sure you come prepared. Make sure you know what you're talking about, and make sure that you're bringing facts to the table and you're not infilling it with faith, right? Because, when you're debating someone like Alex O'Connor, that's just not going to wash. So I found this excerpt of this debate that they recently had, and I want you to listen to it because, like I said, this is a debate that Christians you're not going to see them talk about this one. They're not going to talk about this one at all. And I think it's a good balance, a comparative, because here you have, on one hand, you had Wes Huff, and who has a background in theology and all of that, got his PhD, the whole nine, and he's debating Billy Carson, who doesn't. He's very knowledgeable in a lot of things, but theology is, he's unofficial in that, but he does have some knowledge in that. But he's unofficial. I'll just put it that way. I would say this debate here is kind of the same thing. You have one person, Alex O'Connor, who has a background in theology, graduate of Oxford in that area, right? And then you have Dinesh D'Souza, who, on the other hand, he doesn't have a formal education in theology, but he has acquired some knowledge over time on the topic. So I think it's a fair comparison, I think. So without further ado, like I said, let me go ahead and play the debate. And I may interject just one time, but I just want you to hear it, okay? So let's go ahead and let me bring it up for you, and let's take a listen at this, okay? I thought it was a pretty good debate.
Now imagine that the gospel writers had written what you just said. Imagine in the actual texts, one of them said he was 33 when he died because of the number 3 and its significance.
Correct.
And another said that he was 34 because of the number 4 and its significance. That would be a contradiction. And in that instance, not just a historical contradiction, but a spiritual and theological one too.
Actually, no, it actually wouldn't.
Oh, come on.
It wouldn't. I'll tell you why.
You don't think that's a contradiction?
No, it's not a contradiction at all, because the gospel writers are constantly
contradicting each other.
No, not contradicting each other. If they were constantly contradicting each other, you wouldn't have spent half an hour on a single event that, frankly, I haven't even heard of. In fact, no one's ever heard of. I've never ever heard anyone discuss this in any context. So which event? This prophecy about Hosea. I'll go back and look at all this. But what I'm trying to get at is, if you had a plethora of contradictions, you wouldn't be spending the entire debate on one that I'm sure no one in the audience has heard of either.
Hold on.
But okay, you've heard of it. Probably because you've been listening to his YouTube channel, right?
You don't think that this is a highly discussed point of contention in the Gospels, the flight to Egypt and its contradiction with
the flight to Egypt. Look, the flight to Egypt is an important event in the Gospel. I'm not saying.
Dinesh, also you said, why could you only bring up this one example? Take your pick. The date of Jesus' crucifixion, whether they're to take a staff or not to take a staff, the dating of Jesus flipping the tables at the temple, Mary Magdalene and what she says at the tomb, when the temple curtain rips. In the Gospel of Luke, it says that this happens before Jesus' death, and in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, it says that it happens afterwards. We can go through any of these contradictions that you like, but the problem is that what you're going to tell me is that it's trivial, And then when I try to explain that it's not trivial, you say, oh, well, I haven't even heard of it and no one else really cares about this. When other people do, by the way, this is a highly discussed point of contention in the gospel. Mm-hmm. All I'm asking you to do is say that this is, when I mentioned the staff in my opening statement, and I said that whether or not they take a staff is a totally trivial contradiction, I'm not bothered by that. If I were a Christian, I would say, yeah, of course, because the texts are not going to perfectly accord. But for some reason, Augustine could not accept this, and so comes up with this ludicrous idea of a literal staff and a metaphorical staff that Jesus is talking about. If you were willing to just say, yes, this is a contradiction, but that doesn't upset the method of Christianity, I think it would be a much more defensible and respectable approach. But instead it seems that you're unwilling to admit that there's even a single contradiction in these texts.
Mm-hmm. I am saying that the texts are written from 4 different points of view.
But do they contradict each other?
And it is quite possible that on details, Matthew tells you things that are not in Mark or different than Mark. Different than Mark. Contradict Mark.
Contradict Mark.
Yes, contradict Mark. And so the point is, here's my point. You're acting, look it this way. You would be scoring a point if you could say, God wrote 4 books and they contradict each other. Just like if you're able to say, Dinesh said this in the beginning of the debate and that at the end of the debate, Dinesh is contradicting himself. On the other hand, if we have 2 guys who are here today to go and write an account of this debate, mm-hmm. right? And then we look at their accounts, which are authentic, first person, I was their accounts with a lot of detail. Yep. And one guy says, for example, the lights were dark. The other guy says the lights were dim. Or one guy says, for example, that Dinesh was sitting at a 45-degree angle. Another guy says it was a 50-degree angle.
Yeah.
But these are not. Now imagine, and then someone goes, Dinesh was sitting at a 43.5-degree angle because he thought this was a way of maximizing his rhetorical effectiveness for the audience. People would be like,
now imagine somebody said,
no, sorry, and he's getting ready to get into it right now. No, the contradictions between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are more than just angles. It's not just okay, this, that, or whatever. And Alex O'Connor just went down the whole list of the different contradictions. He mentioned Mary Magdalene at the tomb. You have one account that says that she was there and she did one thing, and then you have another account that says something else, and so there are some major contradictions between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, not to mention the fact that was there a Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the first place historically that even wrote it? There are many theologians that have come to the conclusion that no, they didn't really exist historically, that these are just arbitrarily, they just came up with these names and basically said, okay, this one is going to be called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But historically, I challenge anyone to look up, is there any historical evidence that proves Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John actually existed outside of the biblical text? So, I would just challenge people to do that. Let me go back into it because I don't want to disrupt their flow here.
Now imagine somebody said, Alex was wearing a blue jacket, and the reason he was wearing a blue jacket, someone said it's a blue jacket, someone else said it's a red jacket. Who cares? You're quite right. But if somebody said specifically, I know that the reason he was wearing a blue jacket was because there's an upcoming election in the UK that's just been announced and he was trying to represent the Conservative Party. And somebody else said, I know that the reason he was wearing red, and in fact he told us himself that the reason he was wearing red is because he wanted to support Labour in the upcoming general election in his home country.
Okay, perfect
you would
example.
say that is a contradiction and means that one of you wasn't paying close enough attention, not just to the colour of my jacket, but the very message that I was trying to get across.
Yes.
That could well be true, but what I'm getting at is we know just from normal experience, that if the two of us are sitting in a cafe and we see an accident, mm-hmm. these kinds of differences are normal. So let's just say, for example, here's God showing us a revelation, and the revelation can be whatever it is, and you and I write an account of it, and somebody finds that my account of it not only is different than yours, but let's just say, for example, I go, oh, Jesus was wearing a cloak. Another guy goes, he's wearing a robe. For anyone to actually think that this is, in fact, a refutation of the truth of the Bible is ludicrous. So anyway, in our format, we've agreed to do a flip where you've been asking me questions. Now, let me ask you something.
If you've got something to ask.
Let me turn around and ask you questions in a sort of what I think is a more fundamental mode, because it gets to what the Bible really is.
Let's hear it.
Do you think that the universe had a beginning?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I would suspect yes.
You suspect yes.
Yeah, sure.
How did the writers of the book of Genesis know that?
I have no idea. It could, I mean, if I'm going to be,
They guessed?
if I'm going to be cynical about this, if they did guess, it would be a 50-50 guess. And I also think that if we had scientific...
Would it be a 50-50 guess?
Yeah, because, and it might even be worse than that for you, because if we had some kind of scientific popular hypothesis, because of course the Big Bang might not have been the beginning of everything, who knows, right? But like whatever the popular scientific hypothesis is, if it were pointing to an infinite universe, for example, as Einstein thought we lived in, then I'm sure that people would open Genesis. They would say that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and say that the earth just means the earth itself, right? Like I think it would be equally easily interpretable on either account.
All right. So one of my professors at Dartmouth was Robert Jastrow. He headed the Mount Wilson Laboratory, one of the great astronomers of the 20th century.
Sure.
So Jastrow writes in his book, God and the Astronomers, that for 250 years, modern science has been attempting to discover whether the universe had a beginning. Mm-hmm. And you can think of these scientists as ascending a very tall mountain in which there are many pathways. And for many years, with the steady state hypothesis and so on, there were beliefs that the universe was eternal, it never had a beginning. In fact, that was the prevailing point of view. And then Jastrow argues it's almost as if we reached the top of the mountain and there was a bunch of Hebrew prophets or theologians sitting there who had been there from the beginning. So I'm describing now a skeptic, a true skeptic, and a true scientist describing the scientific shock that attends to a discovery that, and I think it is out of the spirit of that discovery for you to go, oh yeah, I mean, it could have been this. It's like tossing a coin. It isn't like tossing a coin. This is a question that's been argued for 2 centuries.
And let me stop here for a second here, because this is another thing that Christianity does. Christianity, it basically has this framework that all of history began with Christianity, that we're supposed to just accept the Christian narrative of history. That's it. And when he's talking about science, for example, he's saying that the scientists, they ascended this mountain, and when they got to the top of it, there were Hebrews sitting up there. But that completely ignores all the kingdoms that predated these other Western islands, if you will. I say Western, but you got the Mesopotamian era, all of that, everything that's associated with that. Okay, so you got all of that. But in Africa, for example, you have evidence of kingdoms that existed tens of thousands of years. On one of our platforms, we talked about Adam's calendar, for example. This is, and it's still standing to this day. Adam's calendar, the way the rocks, it's a formation of rocks that span for miles. And what's funny is that they're in these special they're formatted in such a way, they're arranged in such a way where if you go to them at certain periods of the day or night, it's perfectly aligned with star systems. And this is just one example. Then you got over in India, for example, where you had an ancient kingdom there as well that went back just as far, about 50, 60,000 years ago. I mean, this stuff is all out here. But what Christianity does, it ignores all of that other evidence that these other kingdoms and stuff existed. And not only did they exist, they were very well versed when it comes to science, when it comes to astronomy, that kind of thing. So that's one of the many things for me that as I began to start waking up to this stuff, I began to realize how much Christianity actually leaves out of the historical record. Let me go back.
And only resolved in the last several decades, and resolved decisively in one side and the other. And the fact that you're not willing to just straight out say, yeah, it is actually an astounding fact that we now know.
No. I mean, look, the scientific method has also revealed to us that the Earth was formed about 4.5 billion years ago. That is much later than the sun. The Old Testament account, the Hebrew Bible account, tells us that it was the other way around. So it got that bit wrong.
Uh-oh. Think about it.
All right. So we're Yes, the Bible is not.
So sometimes it gets things right,
No.
sometimes it gets things wrong, you know?
The Bible is not a
not that
science.
astounding to me.
It's not listing out a scientific.
Well, now hold on a second. You can't now move the
Right.
goalpost, especially if you're still gonna miss.
The
doing
issue.
so.
Well, the issue of the origin of the universe is extremely critical.
You just told me that Genesis predicted, or knew about, or somehow knew about the scientific hypothesis of the origin of the universe. Then, when I pointed out another scientific observation that doesn't accord with Genesis, you tell me that Genesis isn't a scientific text to begin
There
with.
you go. There
Well,
you go.
if you read Genesis, it is making a astounding claim, which pertains to God. Obviously, God created the
Is
heavens
it making
and
a
the earth.
scientific claim or not? Is it telling us how the universe scientifically formed or not?
That's right.
It's not telling us how the universe scientifically formed, because if it did, they would be outlining the history of the Big
Then what's
Bang.
the relevance of bringing this up in the first place?
Because
Right.
it is stating a conclusion, not a process. It's not telling you how the universe was formed. It's not
also
telling
doesn't
you
tell us-
about.
It also doesn't tell us how the sun was formed, but it tells us that it was formed after the earth was. It tells us that that's the case. That's wrong. It's incorrect.
Show me.
Well, I don't have a Bible.
Okay. Well, I've read that passage maybe a dozen times. I have never spotted this contradiction that you're describing. But I'll go back and look at it again. But again,
On what day is it that God makes the sun? And day 4? Is day 3 or day 4? Something around there.
You're right, but
when's
the
light
mainstream
created?
of the Christian tradition does.
When's the
It
heaven and
obviously
the earth
can't
created?
be day 4 because the concept of day in the original Hebrew doesn't mean day.
Sure, but day 4 comes after day 1, right?
Right.
Well,
how long the day
it's
is.
describing obviously epochs or periods.
Yeah.
Yes.
So actually,
And not to mention the fact that on the first day he created light. So where did light come from?
it's much worse because now the sun is created much, much, much later than the earth was.
Well, not necessarily.
Oh,
Well, show me.
I don't know. I mean,
okay.
we can read through it. We can find Genesis.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know if that would be the best use of our time. I mean, we can do it if you really want to. But what I'm trying to say is that it's not astonishing.
Let's move on.
It's not-
move on.
Why not?
Of course.
It's not astonishing to me that if you're making claims about the origin of the universe, especially in the case where if it is making a specific claim in the knowledge that there's a sort of infinite hypothesis and a beginning hypothesis, to take a 50-50 stab, it's not amazing to me. It would be more amazing to me if everything lined up and it gave us an otherwise unknowable historical scientific account of the beginning of the universe. But as you say, that's not even what Genesis is trying to do.
boom. Very good. Very good. Hold on, y'all. Let me close this out here before it starts playing something else here. Yeah, so that's his YouTube channel, Alex O'Connor, right there. So, yeah, I mean, I just thought it was a very good clip. And if you go to the video, you saw the title there, right? Just do a search for it. And then if you want to watch the whole thing, there's a link where you can watch the entire debate there. But yeah, so this is what I'm talking about. You know, for me, it's, on my other channels, sometimes when I talk about these things, people want to come to this conclusion that, when you ask these types of questions or when you want to engage in these types of dialogue, if it doesn't align up with the Christian worldview, then that person, those Christians oftentimes will conclude, well, you must hate God or you hate the Bible or you just, like in the case, I believe, of O'Connell, I believe that he calls himself an atheist. O'Connor, that's his name. I believe that's what he calls himself. I'm not sure. I know he's been labeled that or whatever. Haven't seen a debate against that. But just because he's an atheist is someone that does not believe in the existence of God. But I've also seen levels of that as well, different definitions of that, so it depends on who you talk to. But neither here or there. Just because I may agree with what he's saying here, it doesn't mean that I don't believe in a creator. I personally do believe that some higher level of intelligence has certainly created us. That's for sure. I totally believe that. I just think there's an abundance amount of evidence as to that we didn't just show up here. I just believe that. And I'm just looking at the evidence of that. Now, where the debate comes in, as far as I'm concerned, is who is it? Is it the Bible God or is it someone else? Well, when we look at the text that everyone's claiming that is of the God, we do find a lot of inconsistencies, especially when you are taking a very serious look at it from a historical standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, from an archaeological standpoint, it doesn't stand up. That's why a lot of people look at the Bible as an ahistorical book. There are good things in the Bible, but however, it doesn't. But the Christian faith, what it does is it infills the areas that you can't really prove with faith. That's why it's a faith-based belief system. I know that's redundant, right? Because faith is belief, but that's what it is. So in conclusion, I hope you enjoyed that. But this is one of many debates that are out here that you won't see Christians trumpeting this one like they did over with Billy Carson, because this is where we get to the nuts and bolts of the Christian faith and what they actually claim and what they believe. We could talk about what this text says versus what that text says, and you could stay in that zone. But when you expand the discussion outside of just the text and begin to do a comparison between the text and what actual history says, what actual science says, something that's been proven, then you're going to start seeing the inconsistencies. And that's what we try to encourage people to do here on this platform, is to look beyond the Bible and begin to, because the Bible says itself that out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established, right? Well, we're just following the advice of the Bible. You're going to look for the other witnesses that can confirm the claims that are being made by anybody, right? And that's what we should do. That's just a rule of life, I think. You should look for numbers of individuals or sources to confirm what you're saying, and not just fall into confirmation bias and only pick the ones that agree with you. You understand what I'm saying? But I think this video is going long enough. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys take care. And start using this. All right, take care. I'll see you soon.